Oh, hi, I'm Paulina. Thanks so much for joining me today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land, and I would like to pay my respects to elders both past and present of the Kulin Nation and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians who are present. So, here I am on my first keynote in my bedroom, not the place where I expected to do my first keynote. But I'm here to talk about my journey in game dev over the last few years, starting a company and making our first commercial game. And that was a very daunting thing to do when I first started. And there were a bunch of things that I wish I had known, or a bunch of things that I wish I'd listened harder when people told me about. So I thought perhaps today, if I can help anyone else on their journey by sharing those bits of learning, then I would be most pleased to do so. So thanks so much for joining me, and let's go. So I think starting a studio can be like trying to walk a tightrope and juggle at the same time while being in a circus. There are so many things that you need to keep in the air, so many things that can drop, and I think it's really good to know that things are going to drop and it doesn't matter because things have different composition, and like they say, some plates are plastic and some plates are ceramic. So I think understanding which plates are important to prioritize and not stressing too much about the whole thing is something that I really had to learn to do when I was doing this. So in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I started my studio, then move on to some of the 10 lessons that I think I've learned and would be really useful, and then complete that with a wrap-up of things to think about when planning your studio. So around 2.5 years ago, I was pretty tired of corporate life. I was finding it a bit soul-sucking, and I was tired of working in the corporate office that I was working in. So I started to plan my exit strategy, which I had decided was to make a game. So me and Ben Boyd started to prototype our first game, and first we did a bunch of research, and we researched a whole bunch of different genres and platforms, and we spitballed so many ideas and discarded them because they weren't good enough. And then eventually we landed on an idea that resonated with both of us, that actually came from a Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I ran with my friends, which was about what if adventurers, maybe not so amazing adventurers, were tricked by an evil wizard into running a magical inn. So that was the premise. And there were a bunch of player experiences that I wanted to give along with that. Some cooperative goals of teaching people to work together better and perhaps a bit more nicely, while simultaneously giving them that rush of, flow state and frantic energy and discovering magical things to connect with in the world. For about 5 months, Ben and I just focused on the prototyping and the narrative structure, and we just had a really good time learning about game dev, not having had any experience on professional game dev before. Although I had a lot of creative knowledge and practices from playing Dungeons & Dragons for almost a decade, and a lot of creative writing and a background of writing and business. I don't think any of that really 100% prepares you for starting a game studio, but it certainly helped, and I'm really grateful for all of the experience and industries that I'd worked in beforehand, because every single one of those experiences, personal and professional, has helped shape my game, has made this business journey a lot easier. So after that months of prototyping, which was really, really just pure fun, we started to get really serious about it, and we started to apply for grants, we started to think about our strategy moving forward of how we would release this game. Making a game by ourselves was very difficult, and I think the best step that we took was speaking to Film Victoria, who gave us a whole bunch of introductions and started us on our grant journey. And one of the first things we did was attend free play. And when I attended free play, I met so many people, and that's when I really instantly started to realize that me as a game developer and me as a business owner, it's much easier to do both of those things in a community, especially one as great as Melbourne's community. And so I think that ties in really nicely with the theme of this year's GCAP, which is Pathways to Connect. I think it's very important to cultivate and foster meaningful relationships, and I think that can bring collaboration and solidarity in many, many important ways.
Sometimes I feel like if I could start everything over, knowing what I know now, I'd do it all right this time.
So let's dig into these 10 lessons that I wish I knew before I started my indie studio. And to make this fun, let's use anagrams. So number 1 is dowsing, untrain, anesthetizing, or running a studio is not the same as making a game. So last year I went to an Austrade talk where Jason Del Rocco talked about how ideally you want to have 3 founders for an indie studio: a biz development person, a creative person, and a technical person. And I thought that was very good advice. When Ben and I founded the studio, I was the creative and business person, and Ben was the technical person. And that was great, except that meant that I had to do 2 jobs with the time pressures of, one person's time. So that was very difficult. And I think that's something I would definitely recommend people to consider when planning their time and how many resources might be required to make a game. Obviously, the type and scope of your game will be relative to what kind of business development requirements are needed. But that is something to consider. Ben and I have certainly found that because there wasn't a third business development person, it's doing all those tasks, speaking to publishers, PR, all of those kind of things. It takes extra time that could be spent in game development, which we don't have, but it needs to get done. So some of those plates are very much fragile, and they need to be looked after because, depending on what your funding sources are and things, you have to prioritize this. Coming back to that scale, if you have more than a couple of employees or contractors that are working on your game, you might also need a producer. And so that's something else that needs to be managed. And with that comes responsibilities of creating studio culture, payroll, HR, yay, so many things. So definitely I would recommend think about all those roles and how they will get filled. So let's move on to anagram number 2, which is Aaron Piffle Scoreless, or professional self-care, which is very much about, I guess, the things that you need to do to start a business. And I was lucky that this is the second company that I've started. I started my first company in my early 20s, and that taught me a lot of things about what to do to set up, and it was really important to do those things properly at the start, and because that saved you so much time and effort, and potentially legal fees later. So definitely, get your business incorporated. You'll need to do that through maybe starting a company or whatever organization structure you might want. It could be a co-op, it could be a non-for-profit, not sure. Something to think about though. You'll need to get contracts. I know IGEA has this cool thing at the moment for new devs where when they sign up to the IGEA membership, they get a whole bunch of contracts and things, which is useful. those things are really important, particularly if you're going to get funding from a government source. They tend to require you to have contracts in place that protect everyone, make all the roles really clear, and also to be really clear about who owns the intellectual property. So those things, get your business set up, make sure you have proper accounting, and that might be through accounting software or perhaps a really, really good Excel sheet, but definitely get an accountant. There are so many things that an accountant can save you money on. It's definitely worth the cost of it, which you can also claim in itself. So it seems like a no-brainer. I would definitely recommend that. You want your books nice and clean. You don't want to get audited. And those are just like very standard business things to think about. There are other things too, like if you're doing contracting, you might need to consider insurance, public liability, so all sorts of things, but definitely worth, considering taking some business workshops or discussing with a mentor about which things you might need. Some other quick things to add to that is think about your company name, your website that you might need, the name of your game, and if that needs a website, your social media accounts, check if they're available, trademarks maybe, that might be too early, maybe do that later perhaps, and also LinkedIn account, get one for your company, be professional, be out there. It's not like I'm expecting you to use LinkedIn every day or anything, but I did find it very useful for finding contacts with publishers and creating those connections or starting those discussions. So yeah, that was super useful. Incorporation was also really important because that was a way of making sure that liability falls on the company and not Ben and I as individuals, because we don't need that kind of personal responsibility. And additionally, it also makes it easy to get a bank account, which again ties into the whole having good accounting records. Last little note from the future Paulina is definitely use the right document management tools and take document management very seriously. Use different types of project management tracking tools. Like we use Hack, for example, we find that really useful, and now we're using Confluence, and Confluence has been a lifesaver, and I would have saved so much time if we had just used one really good system from the start. So definitely take document management very seriously because it gets even more important the bigger your project is. Okay, I don't want to keep talking about this, so let's move on to number 3, which is very hilariously Agnes tagging Fugness. Sorry, let me start that again. Agnes defatting kegs tugging. Yep. So that one is actually getting funding takes ages, and it really takes a long time. So I would definitely start planning for that long before you actually do the game development. I think I was looking at funding sources before I even started the company or anything. It was definitely something I was aware that this is going to take a long time. And it did. It took, I think, about a year before we got funding. I think this Film Victoria process is around 6 months. So 6 months is a long time between rounds. Obviously, that's just one government source of grants. There are lots of different others. But I guess my point is definitely factor how long funding is going to take and also how much funding. So Film Victoria generally funds up to $50,000, and anything more you probably need an investor or perhaps a publisher. So that will take even longer. I think, honestly, probably like 2 years. Depending on where you are on your product cycle. And so, obviously just look after yourself and your personal finances and just be conscious that this is a very slow product development cycle, game development, and it's expensive, and you need to know that where the funding is coming and when, so that you can plan accordingly. And I guess that's something to really be conscious about, is there is risk to this. It's a risky business. There's no guarantees that you'll get funding from anyone. And there's no guarantees when you'll get the funding as well. So I think it's definitely something to really be conscious of, is if you're going to expand your scope, just consider the risks. For example, some of my friends found that they worked part-time while doing it, so that they could pay rent and things while making the game, and that was a very good way of financing it, because unless you have a lot of capital at the start, it's very difficult to finance full-time development right from the get-go. It's also important, I guess, if we're going to talk about funding, that you also consider budget. Whatever you budget for, there are so many things that I didn't think about when my first budget, like how expensive legal fees would be, like really expensive. There are so many costs that you just don't consider. I didn't even think about UI the first time I got a grant, so that was a big learning. UI is really important. Get a good UI person. And factor those costs in properly, because they're just certain things that you can't finish your game without. So from a business perspective and a game development perspective, I think there are a lot of things that you should think about that in terms of budget, and maybe it'd be worth talking to someone else who's done it, or perhaps a mentor, to get a really grounded sense. Because when you make your first project, you can't really scope it if you haven't done it before. So I think that whole first scoping process is often very wrong for the first time game developers, especially a lot of my friends that I've spoken to. So I think don't worry too much if your estimates are, I think I'm going to make it in a year, and then it takes 3 years. I think that's very normal. So I think I got ahead of myself and jumped into the next anagram, which is copyright espouses ceremony. Think you got this one? Think you know what this is? Well, it's scope creep is your worst enemy. And, I have a background in project management and I still messed up. So don't worry, this is really hard. And I think what's really difficult about it is we don't have data on how long it takes to make a feature, because each game takes a different amount of time to develop. Each feature is different. Everything is unique about it. So obviously, if you have a lot of experience, then it will be a lot easier. But I think try and really be clear about the project scope, the scale, how long each things will take. Even consider some type of project management methodology, like perhaps Scrum or Agile. Maybe break down your project into months, then sprints or weeks. There's a lot of things there from other industries to be learned from. I think a well-scoped game can reduce or eliminate crunch. So definitely a lot of planning to happen there, and being really clear and consistent with your scope, and even de-scoping a lot is very, very good and useful to do that. So yes, pay attention to scope. So for an anagram number 5, I have this phrase, which I actually don't even really know how to pronounce or know what it means, other than a vague reference to Monty Python and shrubberies. So I'm going to move on to what it means, which is business is about building relationships. It's not a zero-sum game. And I have a bit of a macro perspective on what I think about business. Businesses are communities, and each community helps each other out. Like a game is made with the help of so many businesses. Like even the butcher is involved. Like if you think about it, the butcher feeds me and I make a game. If you go back, like everything is really connected. But what I mean here is that it's really important when you're making a game to build relationships with people and their businesses and meaningful, happy ways. So reach out to IGEA. They're really cool and they have so many opportunities all the time, and that's just such an exciting thing, and they're an advocate for our industry. Reach out to funding bodies. So it could be Film Victoria, Creative Victoria, even Austrade supports us with different tax grants. and also a range of different kinds of regular talks. There's so much information out there, and it's really wonderful, and I think we should definitely try and connect with all these people because they're all working together to try and support us in this very difficult task of making games. So there are more people, though, that you should consider connecting with that some people don't think about, which are things like your local council. They often have business mentorship workshops or events or even marketing opportunities for you and grants that you might not have thought of. So definitely the more people you talk with, they're going to be interested about the game. They're going to want to try and help you if they can, I find. So reach out and connect with different businesses and build long-lasting relationships that will last. I want to tell you a story about one of my favorite restaurants called Abyssinian, which is this delightful Ethiopian restaurant down the street to me. And we go there to celebrate achievements, small things, big things. We just love to go there and eat their delicious food. And often when through all that time of doing so, they've heard about us and our game, and they've been so excited for us. And I remember once even the owner offered to send out a blast about our game to his entire email list. It has nothing, restaurants have very little to do with game development, but I think that the fact that he wanted to try and help us, it's a valuable connection. It's a beautiful example of how a community can support each other. And I think it would be really amazing to see more stories like that and share them with each other, because I think sometimes with the game development, we can be so insular and focused on our one or maybe 3 screens. And it's really important to look outside. Pathways to connect. Pow. I think one of the coolest thing about becoming a game developer has been that when people find out that you're doing this, they kind of treat you like a strange, underfunded celebrity. In a good way, though. In a really nice way. They just are really excited, and they think it's novel and it's interesting and it's artistic, and that's something to talk about. That, this is something weird and different, and it should be celebrated. There are so many cool people that you can build relationships with that will benefit both of you. I would recommend connecting with educational institutions. They always run cool events. Arts institutions, festivals, exhibitions, trade shows. There's so many cool opportunities for collaboration that I think are important. I'm going to move on to our next nanogram, which is able coagulator yours. Very common expression, I'm sure. Also known as be really clear about your goals. Think about what your project is, who it's for, what it's for, and use those pieces to create yourself a plan. Some games are for hobbies, some games are for personal projects, and some games are commercial projects, and each of those will mean different things in terms of what your goals are. Some games you only want to release by yourself, you want to self-publish them. They won't require potentially a publisher, so that's less work you have to do there. If you are wanting a publisher, you might want to focus on vertical slices and building relationships with those publishers all across the world. So really think about what your goal is so that you can figure out what the path is to connect to it. That's very important. So it's nighttime now, but don't ask any questions. All right, I think we've talked about game dev for a bit, so let's take a break and talk about audience. So this one means test with your audience early and often. This is the key to understanding your audience and building appeal and making right the choices for your game design and market. I think for me, this is really about thinking who is going to play these games, who enjoys these games, who is this game built for? And then taking those prototypes that you've made to those audiences, or even other audiences, just to see who might be interested that you haven't even considered, and making sure that they get to play them and you can see firsthand whether they like them, whether what they react to, how they respond, what excites them, perhaps what doesn't excite them. And it definitely gives you a lot of improvement and places for development and fine-tuning. We did this at Unite Melbourne and at Acme's play testing lab, and we found that really useful, just seeing real people from wherever playing the game and getting to really get a grasp of how this would go in a wider audience. And we're really grateful that we had those opportunities to do that, and I would highly recommend that you try and find some places to do that yourself. And that really could be anywhere. There are so many opportunities. It could be a local playtest at IGDAM. It could be in some type of small university fair or high school fair. There are a lot of different places that I think would be very open to having their game tested. I feel like I should emphasize the early in the playtest early part of this, because we tested it so early into development, like weeks, even less, with real people, and we didn't stop developing until we found that the players were really, really enjoying the game, that they were playing it long before there was any more new content. They were just playing the same things again. That's how we knew that this was a game that was creating a flow state for them. It was creating a place that they would want to play and expand and sandbox. So I think that was definitely important in making us feel confident about our game and its wider appeal commercially. Things always need to be fit for purpose. If you can't see an audience playing this game, or if they're not enjoying it, then it's a good sign that it doesn't have appeal. So this is a really good way of testing those things, because I don't know, if you're commercially making a game, you definitely want to make sure that it has appeal, or there's kind of no real point. I think it's worth just stating that, again, different purposes for different things. If your game's not commercial, then maybe this isn't important, because sometimes games are for you. That's a different reason. Let's now move on to the next one, which is Abby Applied Game Sum, or also known as a game is made by people. I think this is something really important to consider when you build your team, that a game is made by people, so you need to choose the right people for your game and look after the people, including yourself. Very, very important. I've seen so much burnout. I've seen so much disenchantment, disenfranchisement by poor management or virtually non-existent HR practices, or a lack of real understanding of what the kind of culture that you want to build in your studio is. I think it's important that you think about who you want to include in your studio and who you're excluding, and maybe consider if you can open up those doors and make it more inclusive. Because for a few reasons, audiences are wide demographics, and I think that if your studio reflects your demographic, then you have a higher chance of having really sound perspectives for that game and for that audience and how that audience might perceive that game. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it. Also, just championing diversity, I think, is really important in game development. It's a very insular industry. It's very young, and I think the more we diversify who works here, the more interesting and different things we'll get, and the more perspectives we'll have in the room, which will make a better game. Looking after your team begins with setting clear expectations of what is and isn't in their role, so that there's no role creep, which is a term I think I just made up. Scope creep of the role is what I mean. And thinking about what they will get out of it, how you can help them create more mentorship opportunities, or give them access to different connections that might help them in their career. I think it's important to think about the people that work in your team, short-term and long-term, and look after their interests, looked after their mental health, have healthy practices where you encourage practices of having lots of breaks, being accepting of neurodivergence, being accepting of, you know, queer people and people of color and people from different language backgrounds. All of these people are going to play your game, and it's important to look after those people in your game and in your studio as well. When I say choose the right people for your game, I think that involves making sure that people in the game, or characters in the game, are represented by the people who are making the game. So if you want to have women characters in your game, hire women developers as well. And that goes for every kind of demographic. It's just really good to really think about representation, and create a culture that is different, it's mixed, it's open and transparent and honest. I think those are things that will definitely help you look after your people. And particularly in our industry where crunch is really important, or not important, crunch is really prevalent, it's something to keep in mind for the people running the studio as well. Try not to crunch yourselves. Walk the walk. Try and create work-life boundaries, even work-life boundaries in your spaces. Ergonomics, all of these things are really important. Look after yourselves. Have you considered a join crucify spectrophotometer? This means consider the impact of your project. And this one's interesting, because I don't think we talk about it very much sometimes. Games and media has a huge power. And like Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. I don't think Spider-Man says it like that. But the point is, media has a huge impact and a huge reach. It can reach thousands to millions of people. And it can either confirm or create stereotypes or things that change the way we think about society and the people in society. And those are things to consider in your impact of your game. Who is in your game? Who are you representing in there? How are you representing these characters? Are you creating negative stereotypes or associations by particular types of people or characters? How do you think that might affect those people, particularly if they are minorities or marginalized? What do you think that this narrative or game says metaphorically or in a story about these people? What messages does it give? All your audiences will consume these messages, either consciously or unconsciously. Your media will affect other people. And I hope that it will affect them in a good way. I hope it might push the boundaries of what they think, or inspire them to do something creative, or teach people to be more accepting of others. It can do so many things. It's really powerful, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about media and games. So please consider what your impact of your project will be, who it might affect. And with that in mind, consider a consultancy budget. Consider sensitivity reading. If you want to have particular characters, diverse characters, trans characters, queer characters, employ some trans writers or queer writers. Employ the people who you think will best represent those people and give you a really grounded perspective on this and the right way to represent this, because it's very complicated. No one is the same. I think that's why I really like having a diverse team. Everyone at Dragonmare is really diverse, and that means that we have a bunch of perspectives in the room, which helps inform, to a better extent, the things that we do and we make. I think understanding who you're serving, who your audience is, who you might be excluding, those are all legitimate things. And it's okay if your audience isn't for everyone. It might be for a very small pocket, but it might change the world of that small pocket of people. Isn't that amazing? I think that thinking about who you will serve and the impact of this will help you see this game through. It might be a source of inspiration for you, might be a source of joy. At Dragon Bear Studios, we've been working with the Aboriginal community, and it has been the most amazing thing. It's been a wild journey, and we've met so many amazing people in the community, and we've been really blessed to get to work with such talented people and elders and consultants and artists, and that has made our project so much more interesting and wholesome. And I'm really glad we did that. And it was risky, and I don't think many people had done it before, and there was definitely trepidation with that at the start. But definitely, yeah, making sure that we check with these communities, is this something they want? And if it's something they want, how can we support these communities to express themselves, or to be heard, or to be included? These are really important things. When you consider the impact of your project on the rest of the world, there are so many things that you can't possibly know, which is why I think it's important to get external consultants and other people in the room to help you think about these things. For example, think about your art style and how it's portraying women. Think about if it's objectifying women. Is there a reason for this? If there is a reason, if it's part of the genre, then fair enough. But if it's not, if it's for marketing, maybe clearly think about why this is part of your marketing strategy and how this affects your audience, and if it alienates people in your audience, and how it might affect women largely or in the wider world. All of those things have an impact, and sometimes we just don't think about them, but they are a big part of game development to really consider the impact. I think as an industry, that's something that we can do as well that helps each other out, which is to serve each other. How can we share knowledge? How can we create connections, refer people to other people, connect mentorships? All of these things are really important, and I think it's what's beautiful about the Australian game developer industry, is I've seen so much of this happen in Melbourne, and I've been helped by so many people, and I'm so grateful, and I definitely would not have got this far if our community wasn't as amazing as it is. So I think it's very important to serve the community, the wider community, and also the game dev community if you can. I think it's quite poetic that number 10's anagram is comprehensibleness. Comprehensible, yes, it's definitely comprehensible. Okay, I can't remember the words to Chicago, I'm sorry. Anyway, this one means marketing and game development should be one process, which isn't really how you often see it dealt with, but it is in the backside. Oh God. The back end. The back end is what I mean. What this is referring to is when we build games, we should think about the audience as we're building them, build the appeal in the product, which is part of how we do the marketing. Put a bunch of thought behind how your game will be appealing to your market. And that might be in your art style. It might be in your sound design, the genre of your soundtrack. It could be in how friendly and accessible your mechanics are. It could be in the narrative or the writing or the story. There's so many different ways in which a game is appealing to a particular audience. And I think those things need to be kept in mind. So, for example, with Enchanted, we wanted our audience to be a casual, accessible play experience. So we made a really bright, appealing art style that would be adorable, because I love adorable things. And also because kids like things like that. They're relaxing. I think cute things are relaxing. We hoped that bright, colourful things would be more appealing to a wider audience, which is why we went for our particular art style and aesthetic. Getting your game noticed by audiences is also a very difficult thing as well. So that's another reason why I think the marketing and game design should go together, so that it makes your game easier to discover. There's more information about that in game discoverability, possibly.com. So feel free to check that out if that's something that's interesting to you. There is a whole bunch of really useful information out there on how you can build elements of discoverability into your mechanics or your features. So I think that's really cool. In regards to plates juggling, marketing is one of those things. I think it's much better to do a little bit of it at a time regularly rather than a whole stack at the end. Doing it at the start and with consistency will be much better for your game and much better for getting your name out there, which is obviously very important. And with that, I think we've finished the 10 things. Congratulations! You have survived this possibly arduous ordeal of me talking about 10 things that I wish I'd known. So, to summarize, juggling's hard, and to be good at it, it's a skill that you need to practice. And it's a lot easier if you have more hands. So deck yourself out with as many resources as you can and try and figure out what you need to prioritize so you don't feel bad when you drop things. And it's okay because you can always pick them up again and try again. I hope this talk has been useful to you, and I hope it gives you some ideas on how you can connect with others, build more opportunities for yourself. And I think it's important to not be afraid to reach out and ask. One of the most beautiful things about our industry is that people are really lovely here. People have been so welcoming and accepting and happy to help out. You just need to ask and let them know that they need help. And there are really a lot of resources out there that can really give you the information that you might need. So get some mentors. I had like 4 at one point. And make connections, make friends, see how you can help others, and make sure you connect. Take care. Bye.